How much can a child take before the world finally listens to him? Jason Miller stood outside the grand stone bank building with worn-out shoes that were almost tearing from the sides and a backpack that had only one working zip. Yet his eyes carried a fragile kind of hope that refused to die even when people treated him like he was invisible. And as he stepped through the revolving door, he felt every stare fall on him, as if he did not belong in a place where marble floors shined brighter than anything he had ever owned. The security guard's expression tightened when he saw Jason walking slowly toward the counters, and two women in polished office clothes whispered and smiled bitterly, as if the sight of a black kid in a faded hoodie was some kind of joke. Jason kept his head low because his mother always told him that dignity did not live in clothes, but in actions, yet it still hurt to feel eyes digging into him like he had already done something wrong. He clutched the small slip of paper in his hand, the one that held a number he could barely believe, a number he wanted to check because it felt unreal, and because it was the last thing his mother left for him before she passed, a final gift from the only person who ever believed he would become something big one day. When he reached the counter, the clerk frowned at him as if he had walked into the wrong world, and after one quick glance at his shoes, she pressed her lips tightly and said the manager would have to handle this. Jason waited in the hallway with posters of smiling customers who looked nothing like him, and each minute felt like an hour because he knew this place was not built for boys like him, even though he deserved the same respect as anyone else. Mr. Dusson, the bank manager, walked out with a stiff posture and the cold smile of someone who did not want to waste his time, and when he saw Jason, a small laugh escaped his throat before he even tried hiding it. He asked Jason if he was lost, if he understood how banks worked, if he was sure he had an account at all, and each question cut deeper than the last because they were not questions but insults wrapped in polite grammar. Jason handed him the slip of paper with trembling fingers, and Mr. Dusson chuckled again and said he would check the balance, but warned Jason not to expect miracles because kids with broken shoes do not hold real money. Jason swallowed the sting and whispered that he only wanted to know what was left for him, nothing more. Mr. Dusson walked away shaking his head, muttering something about time wasting, but Jason kept standing there like a small tree fighting the wind, refusing to break even when everything around him pushed him down. And as he waited, he whispered that anyone watching should subscribe to stories like his, because boys like him deserved to be heard, and maybe today, finally, something would change for him. He hoped, prayed, buggered silently that the world would give him one moment of fairness, one moment where he would not be treated like a joke. And as Jason Miller stood in that cold, polished bank lobby, he felt every pair of eyes judging him, as if his worn-out shoes were a crime and every breath he took was an inconvenience. And even then he kept his hands folded politely because his mother taught him that real strength is quiet. But Mr. Dusson stood across from him with a smirk that sliced through the room like a blade, as if Jason should apologize for existing, and Jason forced his voice to stay steady when he said he only wanted to check his balance. Yet Mr. Dusson laughed a slow, cruel laugh that made two tellers glance at each other because they had seen him do this before, but never to someone this young. And Jason's heart pounded as the manager towered over him and said kids like him never have anything worth checking, but Jason refused to back down even when Mr. Dusson waved him off like a fly. And Jason repeated that he needed to see his account because he was saving for something important, but the manager interrupted him again, saying the machine costs more than whatever pennies he had, making two customers chuckle under their breath. And Jason swallowed the sting because he had learned long ago that the world did not care about the feelings of boys like him, and he kept standing there with his old backpack sagging from one shoulder as if he were rooted to the floor by pure determination. And Mr. Dusson rolled his eyes dramatically before finally grabbing Jason's account number from the paper the boy held with both trembling hands. And the manager muttered that this would take just a minute before sitting down at his computer with the confidence of a man certain he was about to humiliate a child. And Jason stared at the ceiling pretending he wasn't shaking inside because he knew if he cried they would laugh more. And moments later Mr. Dusson looked at the screen and the smirk on his face froze, as if the world itself paused with him because the numbers he saw were not pennies, but something far bigger, something impossible for a boy in broken shoes to have, and his face dropped so fast even the tellers noticed. And Jason watched confusion turn into shock, and then into something close to fear on the manager's face. And Jason stepped closer trying to see what he saw, but Mr. Dawson quickly minimized the screen as if the truth were dangerous. And the manager cleared his throat loudly and told Jason to wait right there in a suddenly shaky voice, because he needed to run a verification. And Jason blinked, unsure whether this was another trick or something real. But he followed the instruction because hope tugged at him even through the humiliation that still burned in his chest. And as Mr. Dawson hurried into his office, Jason stood alone in the lobby, with every customer now staring at him not with amusement, but with confusion and discomfort. And Jason felt something shift in the air, something he did not understand yet, but something powerful, something that made his heart race not with fear, but with possibility. If you want to see what happens next, make sure you leave a comment and hit subscribe, because Jason's fight for dignity is only getting started. He whispered to himself that maybe, just maybe, this moment would finally be different. But Jason Miller, the 13-year-old black boy with hope bigger than his worn-out shoes, did not know that fate was about to pull the ground right beneath him when Mr. Dawson, the 58-year-old white bank manager, cold, strict, and arrogant, marched back toward him with a look that felt carved from ice, and the entire lobby stiffened, because everyone knew this man never smiled, never softened, never apologized. Jason stood there clutching the torn strap of his backpack, using all his strength to hide his shaking hands, as Mr. Dawson stopped inches from him, staring down as if Jason were a stain on the floor, and the boy felt his throat tighten, but he refused to look away. And then something impossible happened, because Mr. Dawson cleared his throat twice, almost nervously, and the staff glanced at each other confused, and he said in a thin, strained voice that there must have been a mistake, and Jason blinked not. Understanding, and Dawson's jaw twitched, hard muscles fighting pride, because he had never been forced to explain himself to a child, let alone one he believed did not belong in his polished glass bank. And he repeated louder this time that there must have been an error, because according to the system, Jason Miller's account did not hold a few dollars. It held £742,000, and silence drowned the entire lobby, every customer, every teller, every guard frozen and staring. Jason's heart punched against his ribs, because the number sounded unreal, bigger than anything he had ever imagined, bigger than every job his mother had worked, bigger than every night they slept hungry, and he felt heat rush to his eyes. But he forced himself to stand tall, breathing through disbelief. And the whole bank seemed to tilt, as whispers exploded around him, people gasping, murmuring, asking who he was, how someone dressed like him, someone who looked like him, someone they assumed was poor, irrelevant, could have such money. And Jason felt a storm inside him, a mix of fear, wonder, and something he had never felt before, dignity. Because for the first time in his life, adults who had ignored him stepped closer, eyes wide, as if seeing him for the first time, while Mr. Dawson's face crumpled into something ugly, embarrassment mixed with anger, because his arrogance had just been shattered in front of everyone. And Jason sensed danger in the man, clenched fists and rising voice, but he also felt something powerful rising in himself, the courage to finally speak. And he reminded himself that his mother always said that dignity is not bought by money, but revealed by truth. And Jason realized that this moment, this exact breath, was his chance to show the world that he was more than the dirt on his shoes, more than the color of his skin, more than their silent judgments. And as the crowd pressed closer, the cameras raised, the whispers sharpened, he inhaled slowly, preparing to respond to the man who had mocked him, rejected him, nearly humiliated him, and now stood shaking before him. And Jason Miller whispered inside his chest that he would not be afraid anymore, because for the first time in his life, the world was looking, and he would decide what they saw. Jason Miller stood straighter than he ever had in his life, as the entire bank turned toward him, after the screen revealed his unbelievable balance. And suddenly the whispers stopped, and the laughter died, because now every single person in that shiny, cold building realized that the quiet black kid in worn-out shoes was not someone to mock, but someone who carried a story they never expected. And he felt something rise in him that he had never felt before, not anger but strength. And he looked at Mr. Dawson, who was frozen like a statue with his mouth hanging open, and Jason stepped forward with calm, steady steps, even though his heart raced inside his chest, because he knew he was not just standing up for himself, but for every kid who had ever been made to feel small just because they were poor, or because of their skin, or because someone like Mr. Dawson thought they belonged outside. And Jason said softly, but firmly, that he only came here to check his balance, and he did not deserve the way He was treated, and his voice did not shake, because this time he was not afraid, and the room stayed silent like the whole world was listening to this 13-year-old boy claim his dignity. And Mr. Dawson finally tried to speak, but the words stumbled out, and he apologized awkwardly, and the apology was not perfect, but it was something, and Jason accepted it not because the man deserved forgiveness, but because Jason refused to let bitterness define him, and the other customers stared at him with new eyes, and the teller who had laughed lowered her gaze in shame, and Jason walked to the counter and asked politely for a printed statement, and the teller handed it to him with trembling hands, and when Jason took it, he felt the weight of his future settle into place, because he realized that money did not make him special, but it forced the world to see what it should have seen already: his worth and his potential and his heart. And as he walked out of the bank with sunlight spilling across his face, he felt proud not of the balance, but of himself, because he had faced humiliation and walked out taller than he walked in, and he whispered that no one would ever decide his value again. And when he stepped outside, he thought of the kids who felt invisible, and he hoped they would see his story and know they were not alone, and that even the smallest voice could shake an entire room. And if you are watching this right now, Jason wants you to remember that you are more than what people think of you, and you must never let anyone's judgment cage your identity, because your worth comes from who you are, not what they see. And if this moment touched your heart, then comment your thoughts and subscribe for more powerful stories, because your support helps these messages reach others who need them. And the lesson is simple but strong: you are worthy no matter how the world treats you, and sometimes the world needs someone brave enough to remind it.